Hello, my name is Klaus, and welcome back to the Bag of Bones Bible teaching series. Before we begin, I would like to explain something. The reason why I don't look in the camera is because I don't see the camera. About 11 years ago, my eyesight started to go down and down and downhill, and about 5 months ago was the last time that I saw anything. So I'm now completely blind and have to learn how to deal with being a blind person. Anyhow, that being said, let's get back on the bullet train to take the next leg of our trip to the Mediterranean coast. Um, Before we get going, I want to do a real short recap of our first video where we talked about the book of Genesis in the Bible. Real short, in Genesis, we started with God and the creation, then Adam and Eve, and then we raced through the flood with Noah, and then we were introduced to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob later renamed Israel, and Israel's 12 sons, who were the 12 tribes of Israel. So keep remembering Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because you will hear those names over and over again in the Bible. Jacob's son Joseph became prime minister in Egypt, and it was because of that the whole family was invited by the Pharaoh in Egypt, the king in Egypt, to stay in the land of Goshen, a very fertile land in Egypt. So that's where we left off, and now we get into the next 4 books of the Bible written by Moses, the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Okay, so let's take a look outside. We see that the bullet train is now picking up speed again. And in a little while, we'll go at a maximum speed of 200 miles an hour through these 4 books. So what happens? We have Israel and his family, sons, daughter-in-laws, children, grandchildren, and they occupy the land of Goshen. And they prosper, and they multiply, and they multiply, and they multiply. And we are going to skip real quickly through the next 400 years while they live in Egypt. So now with 400 years, we probably have 10, 12, 13 generations of people. So Israel and the 12 sons are by now long gone, and we have a group of Israelites that is growing in number significantly. Very interesting to know about the Hebrew people. They were very much into genealogy. They knew who their grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather was. So everybody knew that they were from either the tribe of Benjamin or from Reuben or from Gad or from Levi or any of the 12 brothers. And they kept this genealogy throughout the centuries. So that being said, now 400 years later, a number of Israelites in Egypt outnumber the Egyptians, and it really concerns the Egyptians. So what they do now is they start to control the Israelites and turn them into slaves. They have to now make brick for the Egyptians. Anyhow, that doesn't stop them from growing, and even then they multiply. And the next Pharaoh has had enough of it, and he said all the Hebrew baby boys are to be thrown in the Nile River to be fed to the crocodiles. There is one Hebrew woman, however, who does not place or who does not throw her son in the river, but she places him in a waterproof basket, and she puts the basket in the river. And there it is found by the daughter of Pharaoh. And she takes the boy home and raises him. His name is Moses. Now Moses, because he is now raised by the daughter of Pharaoh, is raised in the court of Egypt. And Egypt at that time had a tremendously a big and powerful university and library. So Moses learned reading and writing and politics and military strategy. And all of this was necessary in preparation for a task that Moses was going to be given. He didn't know that task yet. A little while later, at the age of 40, and by the way, Moses knew that he was a Hebrew and not an Egyptian. One day he went to see his Hebrew people, and he saw an Egyptian slave master abusing a Hebrew. And Moses got so angry that he ended up killing the Egyptian and burying him in the sand. The word got out, and Moses had to run for his life. He ran out of Egypt and he got into the desert. And in the desert, he got married and learned to live in the desert. That was the second step of Moses' preparation for the task that he was to be given. At this point, Moses is 80 years old. And right now, Moses is approached by God and says, Moses, I hear the cry of my people in Egypt. They do not want to be slaves anymore. I hear their cry, and I'm going to get them out of Egypt. And you, Moses, are going to be the one to lead them out. And somewhat reluctantly, but obedient, Moses went to Egypt and he talked with the Pharaoh, and he said to Pharaoh, my God says, let my people go. And Pharaoh said no. And now God put a plague on Egypt. And it was so bad that finally the Pharaoh said, okay, you can let your people go. So God lifted the plague, and immediately Pharaoh changed his mind and said, no, I will not let your people go. Moses again said, let my people go. And Pharaoh said no. God put another plague on Egypt until Pharaoh said, okay, I'll let your people go. God lifts the plague. Pharaoh changes his mind again. And this goes on for a total of 10 plagues. And the last plague is the worst of all. This is where God will send an angel of death over Egypt, and he will kill all the firstborns in Egypt. It's a terrible plague, but it's going to be done because God said it will be done. God told Moses, tell all your Hebrew people that they have to do the following. They have to kill a lamb and take the blood and smear the blood on the doorposts and above the door. This way, at night, when the angel of death comes over Egypt, he will pass every house that has the blood smeared on it. And this is the Passover. The angel of death will pass over the Hebrew people and spare their lives. They are also to prepare the lamb and eat the lamb while standing up and have flat bread and are ready to go at a moment's notice. And at midnight, the angel of death came over Egypt, killed all the Egyptian firstborns, and spared the lives of the Hebrew firstborns. And now the Egyptians were so sick and tired of the Hebrews that the Egyptians said, go, and leave. And this they did. All the Hebrew people left Egypt, and they were on the way to Canaan, the promised land. And this is repeated, this celebration is done every year today by all the Jews all over the world. They celebrate the Passover. So now they are on their way to the Promised Land. And after 3 days' journey, they arrive at the Red Sea. When they look behind them, they see the Egyptian army approach with all their chariots. And of course, as before, Pharaoh changed his mind and he told the army, stop the Hebrews and bring them back. So now they are between a rock and a hard place, trapped between the Red Sea and the approaching army. This time, God orders an east wind, and the east wind comes and separates the water of the Red Sea. And now all the Hebrew people, all of them will be able to walk through the dry land of the Red Sea to the other side. And as soon as the last Hebrew is on dry land, God closes the water again, and the Egyptian army, which had followed them into the Red Sea, now drowns. Okay, now they're all out of Egypt, but now they are totally at the mercy of God. God from now on has to feed them daily and give them water. At this point also, God gives them the 10 Commandments through Moses. And also, God gives them the instruction to build a dwelling place for God, because God says, I want to be among you, my people. And he gives them an incredibly detailed construction direction for this dwelling place, which they call the tabernacle or the tent. So the next thing that they are doing is they are moving little by little in the direction of the promised land. And at this very moment, we are at the end of the book of Exodus and roll right over into the book of Leviticus. Now, Leviticus comes from the name Levi, and the rules that God will give them tells the Levites that from now on, the Levite tribe is to be the priests among all the Hebrews. And now God gives them a total, including the 10 Commandments, of over 600 laws. I believe 613 laws are given right here in the desert. Okay, on they go. We leave the book of Leviticus and we get into the book of Numbers. Now, the book of Numbers really means numbers. There are, at this very moment, about 600,000 men aged 20 or over, plus women and children, for an estimated total of 2 million people, all living in the desert, all wanting to go to the promised land. And they are going to the edge of the promised land, and there Moses sent 12 spies into the promised land, one from each tribe, and they spent 40 days checking it out. And when they come back, they are all saying what a wonderful land the promised land is. They call it the land of milk and honey. They talk about giant clusters of grapes. And however, 10 of the 12 spies say, but we cannot go in the land because the people are much bigger than we are, and also they have heavily fortified cities, walled cities. We cannot get in. And this, of course, makes the people very mad. The two spies named Caleb and Joshua say, wait a minute, don't you forget something? Have you forgotten all the miracles that God did for us in getting us out of Egypt? The parting of the Red Sea, all the 10 plagues? We can do this. We can get into the land because God is with us. However, the people did not believe it. They said, no, we are not going to take the land. We cannot do it. And they got so mad at Moses that they were ready to stone Moses to death. This, of course, made God very, very angry. And he said, all of you men aged 20 or older, none of you will get into the promised land. You will die here in the desert. All of you except for Joshua and Caleb, who trusted me. So this is a very, very sad example of what happened. But it happened, and over the next 40 years, they stayed in the desert, moving a little bit at a time, learning that God is all powerful, testing God, and sometimes God blessed them when they were obedient, sometimes God cursed them when they were disobedient. And there are quite a few stories in the book of Numbers that you need to read on your own. It's just incredible how the people just fall back to disobedience so quickly. And we can learn something from that. As a matter of fact, in the New Testament, it says that we read about this as an example, that the people are an example for us. So now we get to the end of the book of Numbers, and we get into the last book of Moses, called Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy means the second law. By now, 40 years have gone by. The entire first generation that crossed the Red Sea is not living anymore, and we have new people. And these people need to hear the law again. And this is why it's called the second law. And Moses writes the law all over again and reads the law. At this point in time, Moses is 120 years old, and God tells him that he needs to climb Mount Nebo, where he will die within a week. Moses accepts this. He turns the leadership over to Joshua. And it is at this time that we come to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and that concludes the first 5 books of the Bible, which the Jews call the Torah, otherwise known as the instruction. And they read the Torah every year throughout the year. And if I look outside, we are at pretty high speed here, but we're slowing down. So let's look at where we are at the skeleton. If we take the bone, we are now somewhere at the um, the bottom of the pelvic region on our skeletal. So let's stop there and continue next time with the book of Joshua. So until then, remember this: faith comes by hearing, and hearing from the Word of God. Thank you.